Best-selling author Don Bentley has taken on a new challenge. After writing 4 thrillers featuring his own character, Matt Drake, he took over writing in the Tom Clancy realm and crafted 4 bestsellers featuring Jack Ryan Jr. Now, the former Army Apache helicopter pilot and FBI special agent is writing for another fan favorite. He's releasing his first book featuring Vince Flynn's hero, Mitch Rapp, and the 23rd in the series called Capture or Kill, releasing this Tuesday, September the 3rd. And Don Bentley joins us. Don, always appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
When we talked last year, after the announcement was made that you were going to take over writing in the Mitch Rapp realm, Kyle Mills' final book, Code Red, debuted at #1. It's hard to beat that. Was there intimidation for taking on this character?
Yeah, absolutely, and for several different reasons. So, as a fan first, before I ever became a writer, Vince Flynn is my all-time favorite writer. I actually associate him with Afghanistan because when I was stationed in Afghanistan from 2005 to 2006, there were kind of pop-up libraries everywhere where people would just leave copies of their hardbacks or paperbacks, and you could take one or leave one. And so I read quite a few Vince Flynn books while I was in Afghanistan, and so it was certainly surreal to have the opportunity to write in his world much later on. But even beyond being a fan, I wrote 3 books that didn't sell before I wrote Without Sanction. That was my first book that did. And when my second book didn't sell, I actually took my favorite Vince Flynn book, which was Protect and Defend, and I broke apart the entire book using note cards and taped all the note cards to my bedroom wall so that I could see how Vince masterfully did things. And it was kind of like the difference between looking at a building or looking at the blueprints of a building. And so I really wanted to get this right, #1 as a fan, and then #2 as kind of my tribute to an author, though I was never fortunate enough to meet him, that was hugely influential in my personal and professional lives.
Instead of picking up after Kyle Mills left off with Code Red, why did you choose to go back in time and drop Mitch Rapp into this operation to confirm Osama bin Laden's whereabouts, and then the mission gets launched to eliminate him? Why that decision?
Yeah, so like you said, the Capture or Kill is set in 2011, and it answers the question that Vince Flynn fans have been asking for about the last 13 years. And that question is, what role did Mitch Rapp play in the mission to capture or kill Osama bin Laden? And so when I got the nod to continue after Kyle, Kyle did some pretty amazing things in the series in that he was not content to just tread water. He could have written 9 books that were just kind of the continuing adventures of Mitch Rapp every year. And he didn't do that. He took the series in completely new and unexpected directions and really made it bigger than it was before. But what I wanted to do was to go back and immerse myself in the original world that Vince created. And so when Vince wrote a book, he aged Mitch in real time. And so what I mean by that is that if whatever book Vince wrote in 2007 actually reflected, say, the events of 2007, Mitch was however old he really is in 2007. And Vince continued that until Pursuit of Honor. And then after Pursuit of Honor came back, he went back and wrote 2 prequels. One was American Assassin and one was Kill Shot. That was kind of the origin story of Mitch Rapp. And after those 2 books, he jumped all the way back into the series that was now about 3 years later and wrote his final book before he tragically passed away, and that was called The Last Man. Mm-hmm. And so what that means is there were about 3 or so years unaccounted for in the Mitch Rapp universe. And so as I was looking at that, I thought, man, that would be really neat to tell maybe some stories that happened in those 3 lost years. And I would have, for my first book, kind of Vince Flynn as my training wheels, in that his 2 books, Pursuit of Honor and The Last Man, would kind of serve as bookends for my book. And so when I started looking what significant events had happened in those 3 years, one of them was 2011, and certainly the bin Laden raid came to mind. And I went back and looked and tried to figure out if Vince had ever referenced that. And so there's a section on his website, vinceflynn.com, that fans could write into him with questions and he would answer them. And he actually references the bin Laden raid on his website. A fan said, you know, the question I just said, what was Mitch Rapp doing during this raid? And Vince said something kind of generic or kind of vanilla in that he said, you know, there were a whole lot of things going on at the same time by intelligence officers, CIA officers, in order to set the conditions for that bin Laden raid. And I thought that was a really interesting issue or answer. And so when I started pressing into that raid more and looking at everything that took place to set the conditions for those SEALs, I knew I had a story on my hands.
Is there a process you had to go through, Don? Did you have to submit your idea to the foundation? Did you have to kind of tell people what you were planning on doing? Or did they just, once they, in essence, hired you, did they just say, you have carte blanche, go ahead with whatever you want to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So writers genuinely fall into one of two camps. You're a plotter in that you outline everything beforehand and know the story before you start writing, or you write organically or write by the seat of your pants and you learn the story. You're telling yourself as the story as you write. And so Kyle definitely falls into the first one of those camps in that he's famous for constructing these elaborate outlines that might be 40 or 50,000 words before he ever puts his pen to paper to write the story. I'm on the other side of the equation in that I very much am telling myself the story as it goes along. And so when I set out to write Capture or Kill, I just had the idea that I wanted to tell Mitch Rapp's story with respect to the bin Laden raid. And so there are two people that serve as gatekeepers to Vince's legacy. So the first is his longtime editor, who's Emily Bessler, and she is a titan in the publishing industry in that she was Vince's editor and is still Jack Carr and Brad Thor's editor. And so I had to pitch her the idea first. And I was very, very nervous about doing this because she has such a stellar reputation. And we hadn't really met face to face, or if we had, it had just been briefly. And so I'm doing this over a Zoom call, and Emily was working from home that day. And so all I can see is this view of her kitchen, and she's walking back and forth as I'm talking. And I'm thinking, she hates this idea. Like she hates it so much. I'm going to get fired at the end of this call. And so I finished and kind of dwindled to an end. And she stopped, looked up, looked at me in the camera and said, I love it. Write that story. And so I thought, oh, man, that's awesome. So then I went to the second guardian of Vince's legacy, which is his longtime agent, Sloan Harris. And Sloan is another titan in the industry. And so he and I were talking on the phone. And so I felt better after pitching it to Emily. And I'm like, this is going to go great. And so I'm telling Sloan about it. And my answer from his side of the line is this ominous silence. And so I finally get done. And he said, so let me get this straight. Is Mitch Rapp going to be number 2 in the tactical stack behind Rob O'Neill? Is that what you're telling me right now? And I'm like, no, no, no. Of course it's not going to be that. In my head, having no idea what the story is going to be. But both of them, to their credit, said, yeah, go ahead and run with it. I think that would be a neat idea. And Capture or Kill came from that.
Yeah, that's kind of cool how I wasn't sure with Vince's legacy and the foundation and everybody involved with it. You bring back a lot of the characters that Rapp fans are familiar with, and Hurley and Marcus and Coleman and obviously Irene Kennedy. What kind of research did you have to do, Don, to best understand those characters? You can read them on the page, but you have to have some kind of idea, I would imagine, of how Vince and then Kyle wanted those characters not only to interact with Mitch, but think about Mitch when he's not there, or think about what he might do if he's not there, if you follow my line of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, so Kyle is an incredibly organized guy, and one of the many gifts he gave me with respect to the series was a link to his super secret Google document drive. And in that drive, he had Word copies of Word documents of every one of the books that Vince had written. And so what that allows you to do is quick global searches and stuff for characters to see how they're mentioned. And that helped quite a bit. The other thing I did was reread Vince's entire body of work multiple times, but I lost count of the amount of times that I reread Pursuit of Honor and The Last Man, because what I wanted or had to do was tell an original story, but also not do something that would inadvertently have ripples through the rest of the series that is already
Right.
written and somehow, upset the time space continuum in the Vince Flynn world. And so I really, Kyle famously for The Last Man, I think he even, or excuse me, The Survivor, the first book that Kyle wrote, which took place after The Last Man. I think Kyle even kind of tongue in cheek called it a forgery from the standpoint that he devoted a lot of time to studying how Vince wrote at like the sentence and word and paragraph letter level to try and mimic that style. And I knew I'm not a good enough writer to be able to do that. And so what I went is from the opposite side of immerse myself in the way that Vince talked about those characters. And so I actually, even though I had hard copies of all of those books, I bought the Kindle version for each, and every time one of the characters that was in my book was going to be mentioned, I would highlight that. And then I printed out all of those references. And so I could see, how did Vince describe Irene Kennedy's office? How did Mitch relate to Stan Hurley or Mike Nash, or any of those characters? And so I really tried to use to more get into Vince's head from the standpoint of, I figured if I did nothing for a period of probably 6 or 7 months, I only read those books over and over and over again. Again, not, I know I can't write like Vince, but I wanted to try and make it so that I subconsciously looked at his characters the same way that he did.
It sounds like, again, just from my vantage point of being a fan, not just of Vince's, but of yours, it sounds like it would have been a lot easier to craft a brand new story and take the character a different way. That what you
Yeah.
chose to do really presented a lot more stages. I don't want to say hoops that you had to jump through, but back work and even
Yeah.
forward work to make sure that you didn't do the Marvel universe or
Right.
multiverse kind of thing you
Right.
were talking about.
Yeah, it does, but I think I also felt like I needed to prove something to the fans. And so what was really interesting, it was a completely different experience coming to the Vince Flynn estate than it was the Tom Clancy. So Tom Clancy has multitude of different books and video games, and many different writers have written in his universe. With Vince Flynn, it's only been Vince, Kyle, and now me. And so when they announced the transition, David Brown, my publicist, actually texted me and he said, it's trending on Twitter right now. And what was trending on Twitter was so many of Vince's fans saying, we love this series. New guy, whoever you are, welcome, but do not screw this up. And so what I thought, and that's a valid thing to say, because he was what you get to, like I said, I never got to meet Vince, but I've been fortunate to meet more and more people who knew him. And as a person, as a man, he was a beloved person. Like, everybody has a story. If they knew him growing up, he was Vinny, he wasn't Vince. And his writing has taken on that same effect with his fans. They love this character, they loved him as a writer. And so what I thought, by going back to his era, is that it might not give me some credit with the fans, but show them that I'm just as big a fan of Vince Flynn and Mitch Rapp as they are. You know, kind of the
Yeah.
analogy I use a lot. I'm a kid of the 80s. I love the movie Top Gun. I was very nervous when Top Gun Maverick came out because I thought, they're going to ruin this. They're going to ruin this thing I've loved so much. And when I watched the movie, I loved it because they paid an homage to the scenes and the inside details that we as fans loved, while still taking the story in a new direction. And that's what I tried to do with Capture or Kill.
One thing I find is really kind of fun is that you do a lot of back and forth with Rapp's team, the SEALs, and the Army
Yeah.
Rangers. And one in particular, you have Rapp actually taking a detour from his original mission to rescue a captured Ranger with some benefit if he does. But it seems kind of fun that you kind of have that
Yeah.
byplay between the SEALs and the Rangers. Was that actually kind of a fun exercise for you to drop into this book?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And so um, I have an Army background. I wasn't in the special operations community, but the majority of my jobs once I left the Army have been working for companies who develop technology for folks in the special operations or intelligence community. And most of my coworkers were from that community. Now, the majority of them were from the Army. They were either Army Rangers or Delta Force operators or Green Berets. And so in my works, there usually is a healthy amount of ribbing and many, many SEAL jokes to the point that my third book, Hostile Intent, in the Matt Drake series, my friend Brad Taylor was interviewing me for it, and he said, "You might have crossed the line here. There might be too many SEAL jokes in this book." And so that was really hard for me because Vince loves SEALs. Like Scott Coleman was a SEAL Team 6 operator. He figures hugely in it. And so I knew that having just observed the rivalry between members of the special operations community that it was there, but I kind of had to turn it on its head a little bit and have it not be have an Army guy, an Army Ranger by the name of Fred Saxton, take the brunt end of the ribbing this time around, which was very difficult for me to do as an Army guy, but it stayed true, I think, to Vince's vision of his universe.
Yeah, and a good section of the book too. I can't remember exactly how many pages, but there's a pretty good section of the book that is on what happens when Rapp makes that decision to go after this young man and
Yeah,
rescue him. And that wasn't just like 4 or 5 pages. It was a pretty good
yeah.
chunk of the book. And so I think it kind of helped to bring that out. And then Coleman gets involved and everything like that. So that I thought was a lot of fun. I also picked up in reading it some of your what seemed to be hat tips to Jack Carr. You actually use the phrase terminalist. You actually also have a hat tip to Mark Greaney with everybody, all the operatives love the gray man. So again, is that kind of a fun thing to do, to maybe insert a little bit here and there to say, hey guys, thanks for anything you've done for me in the past?
Yeah, 100%. This community of writers, the thriller, military thriller, espionage writer, is bar none the most supportive, the friendliest, the most welcoming community I know. And so Jack Carr, I tell people all the time, I'm fortunate enough to know him a little bit personally outside of the world, and he is the same genuine guy that he appears to be on social media when you know him in person. Mark Graney has kind of been a mentor to me. He was, when I was presented with the opportunity to write in the Clancy universe, my editor said, before you say yes or no, get on the phone with Mark Graney and he'll shoot you straight. And he did and was fantastic. You'll also see in the book Taylor Moore and Connor Sullivan, who are also
Yeah.
authors and friends of mine, make a cameo. I tend to put a lot of my friends in the books. Many of them served, and so there are three Rangers in the book: Brandon Cates, Greg Glass, and Jeff Mishler. They're all friends of mine. They all actually are Army Rangers who served in combat together in Afghanistan. There's another character, Mark Garner, who is a young Army company commander. And so Mark's story is a little different. Beginning with my last Tom Clancy book, Weapons Grade, what I decided to do, since I was using friends or people I knew as characters in the book, was to use two people who had were killed in action as characters in that book. And so in Weapons Grade, it was Shannon Kent, who was a Navy enlisted person, but she was also in JSOC, one of the very few women to be in that organization. And she was tragically killed by a suicide bomber in Syria. Her husband, Joe Kent, is a former Green Beret and is an incredible guy. He gave me permission to use her, along with Isaac Black. So Isaac Black is the son of Brian Black, who was a Green Beret who was killed in Niger, and his widow, Michelle Black, who has a phenomenal story and a great book of her own, gave me her permission to do that. So in Capture or Kill, I decided to use Mark Garner. Mark in real life was Ranger qualified. He wasn't from the Ranger Regiment, but he was an infantry platoon leader in the 82nd Airborne and then a infantry company commander in Germany at the same time I was. He and his beautiful wife, Nikayla, were our next door neighbors. And when I returned, left Germany to go back home, Mark ended up taking his company to Afghanistan, and he was tragically killed in an IED in Afghanistan. And so his amazing wife, Nikayla, actually stayed in Germany. She does grief counseling and things for spouses. Actually, is now married to a German guy, and they have 3 kids. And the oldest is named for Mark and was born on Mark's birthday. And so
Nice.
Mark is an actual hero. He is from a small town in North Carolina. Went to West Point, married his hometown sweetheart, and this is my way of making sure that his memory stays alive.
Well, I'm going to keep reading all of your books then, because maybe at some point in time, Matt Drake or Mitch Rapp will be listening to a newscast, and the anchor John Evans will say something. So I'm going you're going to have another fan at least for the rest of the time you're writing, because it may be kind of cool to be dropped inside one of these adventures. And just officially here, you have my okay to do that if you'd like to do that.
Awesome. I can't guarantee that you'll live through the book, but I'll do my best to put you in there.
That's funny. What's next? Another Rapp adventure, or you're bringing Matt Drake back again? Where are we going to see Don Bentley's name on the book again?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate right now to be in the position where I have more projects than I have time to work on them. And so I wrote my 4th Matt Drake book, Forgotten War. I think it came out about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
After it came out, my editor said, hey, what I'd like you to do is write a standalone that's a little bit different, and then before we come back to that series. And so I've been working on that standalone kind of in my spare time, but the majority of my work day right now is centered on my 2nd Mitch Rapp book. So that should come out about this time again in 2025.
The new book by best-selling author Don Bentley is Capture or Kill, his first in the realm of Mitch Rapp, the espionage agent, available next Tuesday, September 3rd, all around the world. Don, again, I love the book. I thought it was a great debut. You did very well. Longtime Mitch Rapp fans are going to be very excited to read it. Once again, congratulations and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, John.